All right, so let's move on to Daniel chapter 2. And I've entitled this, The Kingdom and the Kingdoms. Take the long view. Take the long view. And Daniel chapter 2 has to do with a dream of a man who gives an impossible task. And the impossible command, let's read about it in chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him, and sleep deserted him. So the king gave orders to summon the magicians, mediums, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So this is obviously a recurring dream, right? When they came and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream and am anxious to understand it. In this day, people gave a lot of credence to dreams. They believed that God or the gods spoke to them in dreams. And he's had a dream repeatedly that has upset him, probably because it has to do with the most important thing in his life, which is his power, right? Well, as we're going to discover, it definitely has to do with power. And it has to do with imperial power, no less. The Chaldeans spoke to the king. And by the way, the Aramaic begins at this point. From Daniel chapter 2, verse 4 through chapter 7, all of it is in a different language than the rest of the language of the Old Testament. The rest of the book of Daniel and the rest of the Old Testament's in Hebrew. But this is in Aramaic. And I think that's an interesting move because Daniel's chapters 1 through 7 have to do with God's work among the nations. And so the language of the nations is used. And the lingua franca, the common language in that period, was Aramaic. Aramaic is still spoke in some villages in Syria, by the way. But it's pretty much a dead language other than that at this point. And Aramaic was the language that Jesus himself used as a common language. And so, it's the message to the nations. May the king live forever. This is the Chaldeans. Tell your servants the dream and we will give the interpretation. Now notice this. You've got a dream, you've got an interpretation. Both are considered to be from God, right? But these are false priests, and they're saying, listen, you give us the dream, and we'll dream up we'll give you the interpretation. You give us the dream, and we'll give you the interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar is a bit smarter than his counselors. The king replied to the Chaldeans, my word is final. My word is final. Wow. I've got ultimate authority. Now, let me tell you, you should know a bit about Nebuchadnezzar at this point. My word is final. His claim is, what I say goes. He's taken it beyond Truman, right, who said the buck stops here. He's saying, my word is final. What I say is it. So this is, he is the megalomaniac of megalomaniacs. He's got all authority. And he actually has it right at this point. My word is final. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation. So I'm not going to tell you the dream. You got to tell me the dream and its interpretation. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb and your houses will be made a garbage dump. But if you make the dream and its interpretation known to me, you'll receive gifts, a reward, and great honor from me. So make the dream and its interpretation known to me. No pressure. They answered a second time. May the king tell the dream to his servants. They're starting to get nervous. Just tell us the dream and we will make known the interpretation. The king replied, I know for certain you're trying to gain some time because you see that my word is final. If you don't tell me the dream, there is one decree for you. You have conspired to tell me something false or fraudulent until the situation changes. I know how you guys work. Charlatans. So tell me the dream, and I will know you can give me its interpretation. I'm not going to believe your interpretation unless you can tell me what the dream is. Well, how do you look into a man's memory? That's not possible for us as human beings, is it? So the Chaldean magicians are really in trouble. The Chaldeans answered the king, "No one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of any magician, medium, or Chaldean, who are the best magicians or mediums. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals." Because of this, the king became violently angry and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. The decree was issued that the wise men were to be executed, and they searched for Daniel and his friends to execute them. Another high-pressure moment. Notice what Daniel does in response. And then Daniel responded with tact and discretion. I think that's important to notice. When you're in a tough situation, you don't just let your bile go. Tact and discretion. I like this guy. I really do. He doesn't let his guard down. And he talks directly to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He asked Arioch, the king's officer, "Why is the decree from the king so harsh?" And then Arioch explained the situation to Daniel. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so that he could give the king the interpretation. So Daniel was probably off running the empire, making sure things were going well, and all of a sudden he's going to be put to death because of these others that wouldn't do what they should do. Daniel went to his house and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter, urging them to ask the God of the heavens. The God of the heavens is used 5 times in Daniel chapter 2. And I want you to notice that because it's used 5 times because it's Daniel's way of providing a reminder. You've got gods who are in the heavens and on the earth. You guys make them up all the time. We know the God over the heavens. We know the God who made the heavens and the earth. So he asks his friends, he urges them to ask the God of the heavens for mercy concerning this mystery. We are up against the wall. We're going to lose our lives. Lots of other people are going to be put to death. It's a mystery. We don't know what it is. What do we need to do? Well, we need to pray. These are already praying men, so they do what they've been doing, and they get even more serious about it. So pray. Ask the God of the heavens for mercy concerning this mystery. That word mystery is so important here. The reason that we're so interested in eschatology is because so much of it stands in the future as a mystery to us. We want to know what God is doing, how things are going to turn out. It's a mystery to us. A mystery, in a biblical sense, is God's plan for history that we don't know, that can only be made known to us by God revealing it to us. Now, from a big biblical perspective, the mystery of God is Jesus Christ himself. Because he's the very center of history. He is the very key to all of history. And what the book of Daniel is doing is it's taking us step by step through all these visions and dreams to see how God is going to bring all of history into its unity for his purposes in his Son, Jesus Christ, who in the end is going to end up coming in 2 times. The first time, he comes in order to sacrifice himself for the sins of humanity. The second time he comes, he will come in final judgment of the entire world. Humanity, angels, everything will be judged. And what Daniel is doing is giving more detail than the Israelites ever had about who Jesus Christ is and what he will do. And that's the book of Daniel in a summation. But even before we begin to look at that, and I think Daniel chapter 7 in many ways and Daniel chapter 9 give us so much detail that is absolutely shocking how much we get to know about the Messiah through Daniel. But we'll get there. In the meanwhile, they've got this problem. Ask God for mercy concerning this mystery so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. The mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night. So he's praying. He has a vision. Now I know what's going on. Now, think about it. Nobody can read Nebuchadnezzar's mind, but God reveals to Daniel what has been going on in Nebuchadnezzar's mind. Only God can do this. And Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, recognizes this as well. The mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night, and Daniel praised the God of the heavens and declared, listen to what he declares, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. Nebuchadnezzar says, I have the final word. I have all power. I can put you to death. I'm going to put you to death. And Daniel says, no. God has all wisdom and all power. Daniel, even with these statements, with the terminology of the God of the heavens, understands the hierarchy of being. There is a God, nobody else is God. God has all wisdom and power. If anyone on this planet has wisdom and power, it's because God gave that person wisdom and power. All of it depends upon God. He has wisdom and power. He changes the times and seasons. So history itself has its progress. The times and seasons, the days and years are all mapped out by God. God has planned it from the past. He's going to bring it about, and it works from past to present to future. All of it has been mapped out by God. This is a grand claim for the total control of God over all of human history, the history of individuals, the history of nations. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. You know, in some ways, there's already a message from Daniel, or through Daniel, from God to Nebuchadnezzar. God is being patient with Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, you have the final word, you think. But I, God, I put you in your place. I can take you out of it too. He changes, he removes, he establishes, he gives wisdom to the wise. Here's a message to the Babylonian University and all of those professors. God has the wisdom. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness, and light dwells with him. The darkness, those areas that we cannot see, he's already aware of them. And he can put a light on them. That's the kind of God we have. All wisdom and power. Everything that exists has its existence from God. God knows all about it. God has total control over it. And the only reason that it exists and can function and move is because God grants it to his creatures. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my ancestors, the same God of Israel who revealed himself through Moses. This is Daniel's God. You may call him Belshazzar, but he doesn't worship Bel. He worships the Lord God, the only God. He is the one. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my ancestors, because you have given me wisdom and power. Now, that claim, I think, is important for all of us. If you have wisdom of any kind, it's a gift. If you have authority or power of any kind, it's a gift, and it ultimately comes from God. And because it comes from him, he's going to hold each one of us accountable for what we do with the knowledge and the power that we have. That ought to frighten us into doing everything for his glory and his glory alone, and with utter humility, because we have to recognize where it all comes from. And now you have let me know what we asked of you, for you have let us know the king's mystery. And the king's mystery is a mystery that is given to the king by God. And now Daniel is going to give the interpretation. And therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had assigned to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He came and said to him, "Don't destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I will give him the interpretation." Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said to him, "I have found a man among the Judean exiles who can let the king know the interpretation." I found the interpretation and the dream. The king said in reply to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me the dream I had and its interpretation?" You got to tell me both. You can't just tell me one. Got to tell me both. Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able. None of us have the power to make known to the king the mystery he asked about. I can't do it." He is stating, I don't have that ability. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. I can't do it. None of these cats who tell you they can do it, none of them can do it. But there is a God in heaven who can do it. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days. This is about the last days. This is eschatology. So the reason Nebuchadnezzar is frightened is because God has shown him something that nobody else has seen, and it has to do with the progress in the very end of history itself. The last days. Your dream and the visions that came into your mind as you lay in bed were these. Your Majesty, while you were in your bed, thoughts came to your mind about what will happen in the future. The revealer of mysteries has let you know what will happen. The future has mysteries, and the revealer of mysteries, who is God, has let you know what will happen. You don't know what it means, but it's frightened you. But he's letting you know what will happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation might be made known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. Daniel is still very humble, isn't he? It's not about me. This is about God. Now, he's let me know, but I couldn't do this. This is not of me. That's the proper attitude. I think that's, in my opinion, that's the proper attitude we ought to have in all of our life. If you have education, if you have wealth, if you have authority, if you have status of any kind, it's a gift of God to you. And it's not even for you, it's for God to use you to bless others. That's the proper attitude. Daniel's got that proper attitude. You want to understand Daniel's eschatology, you got to understand his spirit, which means the spirit of humility before the God who is everything. Your Majesty, as you were watching, suddenly a colossal statue appeared. So this is about a statue. Now, mind you, these people love statues. Statues represent power and authority. A statue is a continuing representation of an authority that is usually located somewhere else. And if you have an empire, you want to be everywhere at once so you can be in control, but you can't physically be there, so you set up monuments. So a statue has to do with authority and power. That statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold, its chest and arms, and I've given you here a table with each of these so that you can see how it works. The head of the statue was pure gold, its chest and arms were silver, its stomach and thighs were bronze, its legs were iron, and its feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. As you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it. How does a stone break off without a hand touching it? Struck the statue on its feet of iron and fired clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. Have you ever seen when it gets so dry here in Texas and the grass just begins to shrivel and the wind blows and it's just a dust storm? That's the nations. When you think about this prophecy is about empires that are long gone, that in their days seem to be the best thing ever, the most powerful, inevitable. You remember Babylon? You remember the Persian Empire? You remember Alexander the Great? You remember the Romans? Chaff. And you think about it today. What has happened to the British Empire? It's no longer an empire. It's a commonwealth, which is just kind of an honorary thing. Where's the 1,000-year Reich? Didn't quite last. Where are our powers? They're like chaff in the wind. Where is the Soviet Union? Didn't last very long either, did it? You know what the nations are to God? A drop in the bucket. Drip. There goes the United States of America. That tells you, in the eyes of God, none of this has lasting chaff in the wind. That's because that stone that strikes it turns all of them to dust. That's the power of that stone. A stone broke off without a hand touching it, struck the statue at its feet of iron and fired clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, I'll let you finish reading this on your own, but the head of gold is a representation of the Babylonian Empire. The next empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, it's the Medes and the Persians together. So it's two major people groups in the area of Iran and Iraq, in that area. That it's basically the Iranians taking over Iraq, if you will, in that period. Okay, who at that time the Iraqis, if I can use that language, are controlling the rest of the Middle East. Okay. So, and just so you know, you'll run into the name of Darius and the name of Cyrus. Many scholars believe that they're the same person, Darius being the Median name and Cyrus being the Persian name. And we have records of that in a number of places. And so that empire comes and goes. It lasts for about 200 years. The stomach and thighs of bronze, that's Alexander the Great and his successors. That's the rule of the Greeks. And Alexander the Great conquered, the reason he's called the Great is he conquered more than any other human ever conquered in world geography. The legs of iron, the Roman Empire, which in the east ended in 1453 AD with the conquering of Constantinople, which we know is the Eastern Empire. And what are the feet of iron and fired clay? Many scholars believe this is a reference to a revived Roman Empire. And I think they're probably right because of the iron being in it. So it's the remnants of the Roman Empire. And you know where the remnants of the Roman Empire are? It's in your language that you speak. It's in the French language. It's in the Italian language. It's in the Romanian language. It's in the German language. It's all over the place, mixed up with the nations like clay and iron. So it could be a representation. Now, we're going to get more detail in future visions about how these things are going to work out. But in chapter 2, you've already got all of world history mapped out for you. The important thing to note, though, is that stone. That stone is Christ himself. Would you go with me to Luke chapter 20 and look at verses 17 and following with me? Luke 20, verse 17. But he looked at them and said, "Then what is the meaning of this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." He's citing Psalm 118 here. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will shatter him. That stone that falls and shatters. You know who that stone is? Jesus is referring to himself. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2. Verse 6, for it stands in Scripture, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and honored cornerstone, and the one who believes in him will never be put to shame. In him, you got to believe in the stone. If you believe in the stone, you will never be ashamed. So honor will come to you who believe, but for the unbelieving, if you don't believe in the stone, Jesus Christ, the stone that the builders rejected, this one has become the cornerstone, and a stone to stumble over and a rock to trip over. They stumble because they disobey the word. They were destined for this. God has decided to take the unbelievers and crush them with his stone. Every human being has a twofold choice. You can choose to build your life on the stone, or you can choose to be crushed by the stone. I remember one time I was visiting with Karen an old Roman ruin in Great Britain. The Romans had conquered Britain at a certain time in its history. You remember Caesar and all of that. And they had, the way they built their homes was to take a big squarish stone, set it down, and then take other stones and just kind of go in a row off of it. And they would use wood and so on, but that was their form of a foundation. And those foundations are still there. Because I remember thinking to myself, well, that looks like a smooth stone. And then I accidentally kicked it. That hurt. Those things are tough. If you kick the stone, it will hurt you. If you kick against Jesus Christ, it will hurt you. The stone is there whether or not you decide it wants to be, you want it there or not. It's there. It's going to stay there. And you will either conform your life to the stone or the stone will crush you. And that's the message that has been, that's why Nebuchadnezzar is frightened. He says, there's a power in that stone that frightens me. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is right to be frightened. Everybody fears Nebuchadnezzar, even his chief eunuch. But there's one that you should fear more than you should fear Nebuchadnezzar. And that's God in Christ himself. Daniel, if you were to look back, and I'll let you read the rest of the chapter, he actually lists 7 attributes or acts of God. God is eternal. He's omniscient. He knows all things. He's omnipotent. He has all power. He has all wisdom and knowledge. He reveals mysteries. He is faithful to those who humble themselves and trust in him. And he answers prayers. Many of us have questions that we carried our entire lives. We want to know things. We especially want to know, God, can you change me? Can you change my loved one? Can you take the evil and the bad decisions that we have done and turn them into good? And you know what? All you got to do is ask God, and he's going to do something with your prayer. Because he's a God who answers prayer. He answers prayers to solve the unsolvable. These men faced death. They had to do that which they could not do. God gave them away. Why? Because they prayed. They just asked. I think the greatest need I know I have in my own life is I just need to pray more. We need to be like Daniel and pray, and God will take and he will solve the unsolvable problems. Okay, I'm going to stop the lecture right there, and with some of the time we have left, I'd like to open it up for questions.